the two guitars that I used on the record were these two. And the first one is one that I've had for a little more than 20 years now. I got it in high school. It was my first real guitar. It looks like a custom Telecaster, and for those of you who guessed that, you would be right, but not 100%, because the neck is actually a custom Esquire neck. So it's an original 1960 neck, but the body is a Japanese Tokai body from the 80s. Now we're really getting geeked out here. I switched out the bridge and put in some Danny Gatton bridge saddles, and then put in some original Joe Barden pickups. These are probably 20 years old now. And then I filed these posts by hand and took them off of an old ESP guitar that I used to have back in my shredder days, and stuck them on here because they weren't as bulky, and I could make my pickup selection switch very easy with these smaller knobs. Something that Fender should think about maybe. But anyway, there it is. I've had this forever. It's missing paint from playing it, and then also I set it on fire and held it this way when I was doing a gig in high school, and that's why it's missing this giant chunk right here. So, I'm sorry, sweetheart. But anyway, that was high school. And then this one is the guitar that you will hear on Transistor Love and on Broken Doses. It's a vintage 1960 Strat, and I've had it for about a year and a half now. The interesting thing about those two tracks that I just mentioned, and especially with this guitar, is that I use the middle pickup only on those two tracks. So what you're really hearing on those tracks is actually this pickup, which nobody really plays if you're into Strats. It's one of the more underused tones, and you know, when Freddie Tavares designed this with Leo Fender, this was supposed to be the main sound of this guitar, of the Strat, and this was your bass, and that was something that was going to be really used to cut through if something was really muddy, but this was supposed to be your main go-to pickup. So I thought, well, let's try that, and I got a good tone out on the record, and wanted to use it. So that's really what I'm using on that, but wonderful guitar. The way that I recorded all the guitars on the record was essentially this way, which was using a Headstrong Little King S with a 12-inch speaker in the back, and the Cloud, the JRS 34, to do all my mics. It's about 2 feet away, off center, off axis I should say, from the cone of the speaker. And from there I would run it into my pedal board, which looks kind of impressive, but actually I only used about 2 or 3 pedals at the most on it. But that's essentially the palette that I had to choose from. And then from there, the microphone actually went into my my giant 2 droids over here, as my wife likes to call them. But I ran through the Shadow Hills Gamma 4 mic pre in the iron setting into the Shadow Hills Optograph, and that's how I recorded all my guitar parts, even on the acoustics. I used the ribbon mics and just ran it through. So from the mic side, it was exactly the same signal chain. This was the first time that I had the luxury of being able to really work with a band, you know, and having Adam, our history, we go back, man, when did we...
do we need to say that on tape?
Long time.
Yeah, a long time.
And both transmigrated from LA, where we were first met and were going to school, and then worked in many different incarnations before we kind of rekindled our friendship, and then having Ben, aka Mo, aka Benwell, the man with 1,000 nicknames. I've worked with him on hundreds of gigs, and so it was great to bring him in. But the one thing that we didn't have was a drummer.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was your recommendation.
Yeah, and Brian had asked me, once we had gotten this started, and said, we need a drummer. I got Mo. I had never met Mo, even though Brian and I had played together for a long time, but we hadn't played together in a long time.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to see all of our, what had gone on through those years, and I had played with this guy, John Toomey. And the first time I played with John, I was just absolutely blown away with his technical ability on the drums, but at the same time his ability to groove. He never lost that. So I knew that he could handle it, and Brian said, hey, Mo does this and Mo can do this, and he's really, a great bass player, great groover. He can do anything we ask him to. He can read charts. And he said, we need a drummer like that. And the first thought that I had was John Toomey. So I told you about John Toomey, and I called John, and John said, yeah, we hadn't talked in a while. John and I hadn't done a gig in a couple months, so we talked, and then got John to come into a rehearsal. Yeah. And we all played, and that first kind of moment that we played, it was like, okay, this I think this is gonna work.
It's gonna work, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There wasn't really any. It wasn't like us sitting down at the first rehearsal and going, oh, this isn't gonna work. I don't like this guy's attitude, or
yeah.
We all gelled almost instantaneously.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ability in the room, but there's a lot of humility in the room.
Right. Which is necessary.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a big part about this. I don't think that, Brian is a very humble human being, even though he's a ridiculous guitar player and composer and lyricist and tone freak, but it never gets in the way of, all right, let's get the song down and have a good time.
All of us were good enough friends with each other that we could actually do this together. And I tremendously value Adam's contribution and his musicianship and his musicality. I always have, ever since we first started to get to know each other in LA. And the same thing happened with Ben, a.k.a. Mo.
A.k.a.
A.k.a. Benmo, that's right. And so I took it on faith of your recommendation for John, and John was everything that Adam had made him out to be and more. And then from there, I knew that, okay, this is cool. I can actually deposit these rough diamonds and really let us, as a group, make them polished and figure out what carats they're really going to be. Because this record would not sound the way it sounds without your input and Ben's input and JT's input, and it's just made the record so special. Adam and I spent a tremendous amount of time before even John was even involved and everything else, just going over tone and approaches to the instrument and where our passions were innately, and then how we figured out if they could mesh doing a recording project, and of course it was 100% all the way. So I think that was the coolest thing for me, is that we could geek out on guitar gear and tone and really talk about what we like, and then bring the musicianship to the music and let that be a testament for what this band is about.
Yeah. If you listen to the record, you're first and foremost, at least I do, I hope an audience gets it, that you're listening to a good song. But then if you start to really kind of get into it, there's all these little things that go on that make it like, wow, I can't believe that. Whoa, there's a dual guitar solo going on here. So you have this Allman Brothers kind of like dual kind of solo thing going on, and then you have some very interesting harmonies going on that if you're not listening is going to pass right by you, because it makes sense. It's first and foremost a good song.
Yeah.
Then there's this tremendous amount of skill and musicianship, and once again, it doesn't get in the way of the song. But to see, once again, to start it from basically the inception in your upstairs attic, to a full-fledged band record is pretty inspiring.
Yeah, I'm amazed that we've come this far, and made such a great project. It's been awesome.
Well, yeah, it's also a testament to what you do. So thank you.
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you for thanking me.
No, thank you. Thank you for me thanking you.
Thank you.
Really, my favorite part of making this record was you know, people are going to look at this from a couple different ways, like, oh, we're talking about being a band record. You also have to realize we did it in all tracking, basic tracking, rhythm tracking was done in 3 days?
Yeah.
3 days.
Yeah. Three tunes a day, and then the last day was 4 tunes.
My favorite part is we chose She's the Only One, because we had had so much fun building that song basically into a riff.
Yeah.
That song started from a riff at a rehearsal. And then you kind of took that and built on an idea upon that, and then we had the original structure for the solo, which was thrown out. Then you kind of took a solo. Then one night we ended, and you had given me this great inspiration for this chord for the end. That in turn, one night we played it and we didn't stop. I just kept vibrating the guitar with that B3 simulator on, and John kicked back into the groove, and Mo never forgot and just kept playing the song, and you and I started talking with solos, and that grew into a 9-minute song sometimes, and it never was the same.
Yep.
That was my favorite part, sitting in a room, because we did that song, we were warmed up, we were ready to go. We had done a couple, and you know, we had eaten. So we were
Right.
we were good.
Their glucose levels were good.
Glucose levels were good. None of us were dying. And we sat, basically, it was John and Mo. And then Brian and I faced them with our pedal boards. Amps were in the other room.
Yep.
And we started doing She's the Only One. And we did one take, which was amazing. And we did the second one, and it was, you know, okay, let's see if we can beat that. And we did a couple more, and it just became really rough. And we finally, you said, all right, we got one more in us. And at that point, we were pretty, it's an emotionally draining song.
Yeah.
But what you hear on the record is, I think, the fifth take. And the fifth take was magic, where everything that we had been working for, John felt where I was going with my solo. You led, John, where you wanted to go in your solo. Mo took over where we wanted to go, and we all fed off each other. At the end, there's this great moment of, like, speaking with one of my best friends, you, where you and I are communicating with guitars, and no matter what happened, it's like I'm saying something and you're finishing my sentence. And it happened, and we got all the way through that song, and we looked at each other, and it was that kind of adrenalized moment of shaking and going, I think that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we knew we had it.
That was my favorite part of making the entire record. That was just a blast for me.
That was an awesome moment. That was one of my favorite moments as well about making it. I think the whole part of making the record, my favorite part was really being able to have a conversation with you and with JT and with Ben, aka Mo, aka Benwell, who and just let go of my normal technique, which is I make all the decisions. And that was my favorite part, because I knew that once I was able to really trust everyone, which I did, I knew that we were going to make something that was going to be really cool. If anyone, just for us, you know, for anything else. I mean, if no everyone else hates it, that's fine. But at least we made a record that we go, damn, that's cool.
Yeah.
And so that was my favorite part about doing this. The other thing was the community that came in. I mean, we had a lot of help from a lot of our buddies that, you know, if we didn't have gear, it showed up.
Yeah.
You know, and it showed up through, you know, people like Mark Lang and Alan Litton and people that are donating their time and their expertise. And these are all amazing engineers in their own right. And they were so excited by the project that they just came in and said, yeah, we'll be here. Are you tracking it? We'll be here. But those guys just showed up and really helped us.
Oh, yeah.
Tremendously.
I don't think that we could have done the 4 songs on Sunday had we not had Mark Lang.
No, and just the gear, you know. I mean, it was great. We had Roger Cloud from Cloud Microphones.
Huge. Cloud Microphones saying to us, let us send us some mics so we can, you know, we'll get some mics for you, so we have those. That was huge.
It was massive. I mean, that microphone really was the sound on the record. We used it on everything. We did all your guitars.
Guitars. We used it on drums. We used it on vocals. We used it on bass. We used it on
B3.
Percussion.
Horn section.
Horn section, yeah.
I mean, really, it was on everything.
Yeah.
And that was something that we talked about in the beginning where we both have a huge passion for those three great studios, those three great Southern studios,
Oh,
in
yeah.
some ways. So, I mean, we've got Stax, we've got Sun, and we have, the Muscle Shoals, and then you throw Motown into that mix, and I just think that it's, that idea of ribbon mics and using vintage gear and going back to analog in a lot of ways was, when we looked at our gear, we kind of knew what era we were going for, and the era that I was the most passionate about is obviously the early 60s is sort of my thing. And I really wanted a Princeton, and that's what I used. I used a version of a Princeton called a Headstrong, and it's got a 12-inch speaker in it, and that's what I used for the whole recording, which is a Princeton on steroids. And then one guitar, a Tele. That was pretty much my sound on this record is my early Tele that I've had since I was 18 years old. So
That's pretty cool.
it's been through everything.
From myself, you talking about the influences, I had always wanted a Firebird. And little did I know, watching the Motown movie, that one of the main instruments on all those rhythm tracks was a Firebird. That's what they're playing on all that stuff, through a clean Fender amp.
Yeah.
So lo and behold, you're picking, what you chose, a Tele classic amp through a Princeton, and something that sounded really good. What ended up being the main guitar for me for every track for rhythm was basically playing a Fender Vibrolux.
Yep.
When you think about it, Fender Vibrolux through a Gibson Firebird,
Yep.
which our tones then became complementary. We didn't have to EQ anything because there was no competing for space.
And you remember what I said about how we were going to record our guitars?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that was a fun day to see it actually come true in the studio. Brian had said, we're not EQing the board. If we need to move the microphone or change our tones, then we will. But we're not EQing the board. The board will stay flat. And the first day on that Sunday when we were recording, Mark said, all right, let me just change this. And you stopped everything and said, no. Do we need to move the mic or the amp?
Right.
Or do we need to change the amp? What is it? And we recorded the record fine.
We did. In fact, we did that from day one.
Day one.
We never. I'm probably just because I'm not a good enough engineer, but I can't record with EQ because I'm paranoid that I'm gonna hype something out that doesn't need to be hyped.
Yeah.
And then when I listen to it in retrospect, I go, damn, why did I do that? And then trying to fix a hyped out EQ is not easy to do, and I've tried it before, and that's why I'm once bitten, twice shy on this. So I really like to record flat, and if you can't get the sound you want just naturally, just by the amp and the guitar and the microphone and the room and the placement, if you can't get a good sound from there, something's really fundamentally wrong.
Well, yeah,
Because the EQ is not gonna
you're
help.
100% right, and that's what we focused on.